Hello and welcome to Let's Review. Zombies. For whatever reason, they've had something of a popularity boom in the last decade or so. But something that a lot of game designers finally seem to be realizing is that actually fighting zombies is by far the least interesting thing about a zombie apocalypse. What's really interesting is how a small group of survivors deal with each other and with the situation. And a visual novel is actually a pretty good means of exploring that, since, let's face it, they're mostly about the talking. But is Dead But Alive actually any good as a game? Well, to answer that, we start as we always do, with the gameplay. The game has two main elements, and the first of these is its survival mechanic.
This is the main camp screen of Dead But Alive. From here we can do a lot of things, mostly related to the management of these various stats up here. So on the far left we have our action points for the day. This is directly affected by how many survivors are part of our group. The more people we have, the more things we can do in a day. Next up is our food supply. This drops at the end of every day, with one piece of food going to every member of your group. So the larger your group is, the more food you're going to get through in a day. Next is our ammunition count. This is used up in combat, and there's also various things that use it. This is our fuel, which can be used again as a crafting material and can also help you explore the world a little bit more efficiently. I'll get to that in a moment. And last we have our building supplies. The more of these we have, the more things we can construct. So if I go to manage supplies, from here we can do a number of things. So for example, if we wanted to do some cooking, that would require 2 action points and would use up 1 food, but it also gains us 4 food, meaning we have a net increase of 3. This is quite a simple, useful little one to do. We can also build camp defences, fuel bombs and booby traps, and each of these takes a while and requires a not insubstantial amount of supplies. Over here we have the day count, which indicates how long you've been playing it for, and a noise counter that indicates how loud you are. The higher this is, the more likely you are to wake up to find that zombies are attacking you. It's simply a classic statistic. You have a 25% chance that tomorrow morning you're going to wake up to find zombies attacking you. You can also manage your party. So for example, we currently have 6 common survivors and 13 VIPs. The common survivors all have identical stats and are completely interchangeable, whereas the VIPs all have their own unique stats. So this is our main player character, who you will never see because they're only ever seen in silhouette, who has a weapons skill of 10, a hand-to-hand skill of 8, no armor, and grants the party 4 action points. You compare that to someone like Renette, who is a retired widow. So she only has a combat skill of 3 with weapons, 2 with hand-to-hand, no armor, and only gives us a single action point. The comparison I like to give here is Mike. Mike is a British Army veteran, and as a result he has an extremely high weapons skill and a fairly competent melee skill. He's also the only player character I've encountered so far that has any kind of armor. Sometimes you can talk to these people, and they will have little bits of dialogue to say, but there's not that many of those. Once you've done what you want to do at the party camp, you then head out here. This is the map of the game's world. So this is taken from the southeast of England. So you have the Isle of Wight down in one corner, Yeovil, Dorchester and various other places. Each of these icons represents something we can do. So for example, this is a rural area that will potentially allow us to get some food, or some fuel I should say. Now it's worth noting that they are different colours, and I'm sure you can figure out what the colours mean. Green means it's relatively safe, yellow means it's risky, red means it's flat out dangerous. There are also various other things, so for example this symbol indicates that there is a survivor there who will want to join our group if we can get to them. And getting to them is not that difficult, we simply have to spend some AP to get there. Or if we want, we can drive there, which will also use up some of our fuel. If you choose to drive, it splits the cost equally between action points and fuel. So I'll demonstrate what happens if we walk to this nearby area. So you will encounter situations where it'll give you a text response of what you find. There are a large number of individual text responses, and it mixes and matches them to create more unique situations. So by the time you finish a playthrough of the game, you will have seen a lot of the text more than once. There is also a lockpicking minigame, which is very simple. If you've seen a similar game in Skyrim or something like that, you will know exactly what you're looking at here. Each time your pick breaks, you will lose 1 point of supplies. And there we go. Once it's open, you will find various things. So for example, here we found food +6, ammo +1, fuel +2, and materials +5. So that was a fairly good find overall, because while we didn't get a massive amount of each thing, we did get a nice balance of each thing. After that, that's broadly all there is to this. So I will walk to there. And that survivor can now join our group. There are also the exclamation points. These indicate story missions, which will require specific things. Usually you'll do a lot of talking on each of those missions. And on some of them you may have to spend supplies or ammunition or various other things. Fundamentally, that is all there really is to the survival mechanic. It's about making sure you keep your food supplies high, make sure you balance how many action points you use. If you want to use fuel, you run the risk of alerting more zombies to your presence. And you also want to be upgrading your camp defences as you go. So as you can see, we're most of the way done on this barricade. However, we need an additional 40 supplies and a whole day in order to finish it. Once you're happy with what you've done for the day, you click the next day, and the process begins again. Sometimes on certain days you will have story events, or when you trigger them by doing certain story missions. And fundamentally, that is it for the survival mechanics of Dead but Alive.
Personally, I quite like this mechanic, although it can feel a little bit random at times. Quite often visiting a high-risk area will net you nothing in return, whereas a low-risk area might have you suddenly finding way more supplies than you actually needed at that time. With that said, though, it does actually help define the atmosphere quite a lot. This overwhelming feeling that at any time, something could go badly wrong and screw you over completely. This is an attitude that very much extends into the combat system as well.
This is the combat system of Dead but Alive. On this side we have our various survivors. You'll get 3 randomly assigned to you at the beginning of each combat section. So all 3 of these are characters rather than simple common survivors. So if I use Renette as an example, because you saw her earlier, she has a melee skill of 2 and a weapon skill of 3. And I can swap which one she's doing just like that. If you use weapon skill, you will use up a little bit of ammo, usually 2 points per turn. So I'll just use her melee skill. She also has 0 body armor. There's only one character I've encountered who has body armor, as I mentioned earlier, and I believe that simply gives you a chance to resist damage. Once we've decided who we're going to use, so I'm going to use Alex on the grounds that he has the best melee skill, we pull this lever, which starts these dials rolling. These dials indicate what's going to happen, so here we are slowing down, and that's coming to a stop soon. You can slow them down further by use of these grinding tools at the bottom. So there I was just on the 6, and the 2 as well. Now because that zombie had a skill of 7, he managed to balance out the damage. After each combat round, assuming your character doesn't get wounded or killed, VIPs get wounded, common survivors get killed. The two party members who are providing backup will change. So we now have Gerald, who is even worse in a fight, but we also have Lucy, who is actually quite competent in a fight. So, she has a melee skill equal to that of this zombie. You will notice that we now have a ×3 multiplier here. If we hit on this ×3, then we get triple the score. This is potentially extremely useful. We also have the skulls, which I didn't mention earlier. If you hit a skull, that means you will get wounded, unless the opponent also hits a skull. However, if you manage to hit 3 skulls in a line, that's effectively a critical hit. The odds of the opponent surviving that are very low, for the simple reason that they would have to get a triple skull of their own in order to equal it. The ×2 skulls do exactly what you would think. If I got a ×2 skull and one of these skulls, that would be the equivalent of getting a triple. So I will spin the wheel, slow this one down, and I overshot the skull a bit, so I've ended up on the 4. A lot of this really does come down to luck. I have seen situations where your character has managed to get an incredibly high score, and then, so the zombie managed to get the triple skull there and managed to knock down Lucy. Because she is a survivor with a name, she was only wounded. Now this is one of our common survivors. If he loses this fight, he is going to be killed. And I'll have to replace him by going out into the world and finding another common survivor. However there, I managed to make that stop on the 6, which is the best I could hope for on this spin. And sometimes it's a risk-reward, because the skulls are always right next to the ones you really want. So the highest numbers or the score multipliers. And that was a really good roll on my part. And again, score multipliers, skulls, and double skulls. Since I have access to another one of my VIPs who is quite good in a fight, I will make use of him. And I'll also have him use his gun to demonstrate that. So you'll notice I've used up 2 ammunition. If I can stop it perfectly on the double skull, all I have to do now is get 1 skull and I will take the enemy out. And I have now achieved effectively a critical hit. So unless this zombie manages to get very lucky and also get a triple, which it hasn't managed to do, victory is mine. After that, you will go back to this main screen and you will achieve something for your efforts. And fundamentally, that really is it to the combat system.
The combat system is okay. There is an argument to be made for how much skill is involved. Sometimes you will just get unlucky, but after a bit of practice you can start reliably hitting usually what you're after, though not always. Overall, the gameplay is not bad by any means, but I think it needed a few minor tweaks to it. The combat in particular, I maintain that guns in this game are frankly far too common. Personally, if I'd been designing it, I would have made guns far, far rarer, but at the same time made them significantly more powerful. In the combat, all they really do is add a couple of points to you, usually, depending on which character you're fighting with. But personally, I would have made them really powerful score multipliers, or possibly have them get rid of skulls on the board to make it easier for you. At the end of the day, I think the gameplay is pretty solid, but it definitely has a few problems that could be worked out in a future installment. The story follows an unnamed military veteran. Following the outbreak of a disease that is causing people to transform into zombies, they become separated from their daughter, and their aim becomes to try and locate her, keep her safe, while surviving the onset of the zombie apocalypse by teaming up with a group of other survivors. As far as the plot goes, it's about as generic as they come, and the rest of the game's plot is pretty cookie-cutter as well. Frankly, it feels like they took a copy of How to Write a Zombie Apocalypse Story and followed it verbatim. I really do wish they would stop printing that book. You're not the only one. Honestly, the most unique thing about this game is actually right there in the title, Southern England. The vast majority of the zombie survival stories that I've seen have all been set somewhere in the States. And frankly, as an Englishman, it's quite nice to see something set in my country for once. Though as someone from the north of England, do you have to keep setting everything in the south, guys? I mean, there are other parts of England. You can set it in the north if you want to. Well, that's about as likely to happen as the Americans setting a story in a city that isn't LA, New York, or San Francisco. Well, sometimes they set them in Washington. Only when they are political dramas. True. Honestly, the biggest problem I have with this game's setting is that I don't actually think it was written by someone who's British, at least not in its entirety. There's a couple of reasons for this. For one, they have a habit of often referring to fuel as gasoline. We call it petrol in this country, guys, just for the record. But honestly, the single biggest clue is the fact that guns in this game are way, way too common. I mentioned this earlier when I was talking about the gameplay, but in this country, guns are spectacularly rare. I know almost no one who actually owns one. I have one. You have a replica of a gun from Lost in Space. And you know what, come to think of it, I've never actually seen you fire that thing. Does it even work? Oh yes. It was made by our friend, so it doesn't actually fire bullets, but it will most certainly stop whatever I point it at. Okay. A quick Google search led me to the information that there are apparently about 6.5 guns for every 100 people in this country. Once you factor in the fact that most gun owners tend to own multiple weapons, the number of households that actually hold one drops well below 1%. As a result, the odds of you actually just randomly going into a house and finding that they had a handgun with some spare bullets going are virtually zero, especially as handgun licenses in this country are very rare. We actually have some of the most restrictive gun laws in the world. There's also a mention in the game that the police carry guns as standard. No, they don't. We have special armed response units, but they are a very, very small part of the police force. The vast majority of police officers will only be carrying a taser at most, and in most cases, they'll probably only have a baton and pepper spray. Is that really that big of an issue? Probably not, but look, it's a personal bugbear of mine, alright? But for the sake of the review, I will move on. The characters are fine. I don't really have anything against any of them, but I will freely admit that they are a little bit predictable, as is the plot. You've got the Git, the supportive friend, the grouchy doctor, and so on and so forth. Overall, I can't really say any of them are bad, and they are at least quite well written. They're just not very interesting. The weakest thing about them, I think, is most definitely the romance tracks, which, quite frankly, have something in common with the ones in Bound by Flame. Okay, that review is from slightly before my time. What exactly was the issue with them? They're pointless. You get exactly one scene for each of them, and it doesn't affect anything at all. There's not even a hint of an exclusive relationship there. You can quite happily see every romance track on one playthrough. I'm going to say to you the exact same thing I said about Bound by Flame. If you're going to half-arse the romance tracks this badly, just don't include them. I'd rather they were left out completely than be this thin on the ground. And that's not even getting onto the story's single biggest problem in my eyes. It ends on a blighted cliffhanger. I suppose it's at least a cliffhanger with them heading north. Though, incidentally, if this next game is called Dead but Alive Northern England, and it's set in the area around Manchester, I am going to be writing some very angry emails. Oh, come on, the only people who are of the opinion that Manchester is in the north are those currently sitting in the Houses of Parliament. Very true, and we've got off topic again. From everything I've said up to this point, you're probably under the impression that I hate Dead but Alive Southern England's story. And that honestly isn't the case. It's not actually bad at all. The problem is it's just got a lot of niggling little problems. and those are the kinds of things that I can talk about for weeks on end. In all honesty, it's reasonably well written, it's competently executed, and it does have some legitimate good moments. Overall, it's not bad at all, it's just nothing you haven't seen before. The art looked a little weird to me at first, especially a lot of the character designs. They're very stylized, and I'm not going to deny that it looks a bit odd initially, but once you get used to it, I actually started liking it. The background art is not massively interesting, but it's completely functional. One thing I would have liked to see, though, would actually be the background art for your camp changing and evolving as you upgrade your camp's defences. It's a fairly minor thing, but I think it would have helped a lot with the immersion and with actually feeling like you were accomplishing something. Overall, though, the art is not bad at all. The music overall is fine. Once again on this show we're in the realms of serviceable, but not at all memorable. That doesn't mean it's bad, it just means that it's not particularly memorable. I don't really remember it at all. As for the rest of the audio work, there isn't any voice acting, so nothing to comment on there. And the sound effects are not great. Some of them are okay. I particularly quite like the grinding sound effect when you're slowing down the combat wheel. But the rest of the effects are honestly a little lackluster, especially when you're using a gun in combat. Overall, the audio is not great, but it could certainly have been a hell of a lot worse. So, did I enjoy Dead but Alive Southern England? In spite of its issues, yeah, I actually did. Should you buy it? This is another one of those times when honestly I see potential. What we have here is a game with some interesting ideas and a lot of flaws. And whether you can see past those flaws really is down to you. But honestly, I think I can recommend it, although not necessarily at full price. I'll be very interested to see where it goes in the future, especially since hopefully they'll be heading up my neck of the woods. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go test out a little theory. I'll see you later. Alright, so does that thing actually work? No, it does. Really? Would you care for a demonstration? Yeah, alright. Was that it? Oh, whoops. Had the safety on. Jesus Christ! You're cleaning that up.